to an unheard American story. Mark McCloskey. Let me unmute him here. And wow, thank you so much, Mark. You know, a lot of people are familiar with the famous photo, and I'll be putting it up here shortly. But can you share your unheard America story? You know, defending your home back in June 2020, the mob of Antifa and Black Lives Matter, you know, aggressing towards your house, you and your wife using your Second Amendment rights. Let's let's introduce you, and before we get into that unheard America story, tell us where you're from, you know, where you grew up, a little bit about you. Thank you again, Mark, for joining Red America First.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I'll give a little bit of background. I was born and raised here in St. Louis. My dad was a ear, nose, and throat doctor. He took out everybody's tonsils on the south side of St. Louis for about 50 years. So if you had your tonsils taken out, that was Dr. Bruce McCloskey that did them. I had kind of I always liked to work. So when I was a teenager, I was an auto mechanic. I went to work on the river as a deckhand when I was 15 years old. I was a chief mechanic on a riverboat when I was 17 years old. I didn't go to college after high school. I went to work instead for a while, and then I got, decided I needed to do something for a living. So I went to college, did real well. Went to law school, did real well. I got 3 degrees in 3 years in undergrad, and then went to law school. And they paid for my first year in law school because I had the highest average of anybody coming into law school at Southern Methodist University that year. And then I spent the last 40 years representing the rights of people that have a hard time making their miracle happen. I've been a personal injury lawyer my whole life. I represent mostly people with traumatic brain injuries, birth injuries, spinal cord injuries, serious personal injury and death cases. And that's what my wife and I, and she's a lawyer also, and we've been practicing together this whole time. That's what we do.
So perfect. Thank you for that introduction. So walk us through, right, what happened in June of 2020. You know, because
Right.
from our perspective, I'll get the photo up for everybody here in a little while, but some people don't know what happened. Can you share what went down?
Absolutely. And I got to give a little background for it. Everybody will remember that a career criminal died of a fentanyl overdose on May the 25th of 2020, and his name was George Floyd. And as a result of the propaganda generated overnight by George Floyd's death, this country was plunged into a series of riots and insurrections, the likes of which we hadn't seen since the late 60s during the Vietnam War, and all promoted by and the flames fanned by the government, by uh, now our Vice President Kamala Harris, uh, Maxine Waters, all these folks promoting the BLM riots all around the country. And on the night of June the 1st and June the 2nd of 2020, those people that claim to hold the moral high ground, those people that are the champions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, decided that the best way they could show their love for downtown St. Louis was by setting it on fire. And they burned downtown St. Louis, and they shot 4 police officers that night and murdered Police Captain David Dorn. And the most impressive thing my wife and I saw was the 7-Eleven in downtown St. Louis, 2 blocks from police headquarters. From the time the first brick went through the window and they looted it empty, and then they set it on fire. And my wife and I are watching this from a live helicopter feed, and the roof collapses in 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes. We're watching this on a live helicopter feed. You know how many police officers showed up? 0. You know how many firemen showed up? 0. And we look at each other and say, when the fit hits the shan, you're out there and you're wild lonesome. And we just, in the ensuing weeks, more and more of the businesses in our neighborhood started getting vandalized, the windows broken out, getting raided. There's a little pharmacy around the corner from my office building, which is 3 blocks further into the city than my house. And I go over there, and all the roll-up steel doors have been torn off their tracks, and it's all boarded up. And I went and I talked to the owner. I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, the alarm went off. And I said, would you come down to see? And he said, no, I didn't want to get killed. So what happened? Well, they were in there for 6 hours. They stole everything they could steal. They broke everything they couldn't steal. I said, did the cops ever show up? He said, yeah, 10 hours after the alarm went off. Once again, when the fit hits the shan, you're out there and you're wild lonesome. And so one of the advantages of living in a city that's as lawless as St. Louis is that you get to advertise your crimes ahead of time. And this Antifa organization called Expect Us St. Louis, headed by soon-to-be ex-Congresswoman Cori Bush, put out a flyer saying they're going to have a mob action in our neighborhood that Sunday, which was June the 28th, 2020. And because we knew that they like to burn stuff, and there's stuff including us in our house that we didn't want to have burned, I went and got a whole bunch of fire extinguishers and put them around the first floor of the house. And since we know they like to shoot people and we didn't want to go down without a fight, I put a whole bunch of guns around the first floor of the house. And our then 31-year-old daughter was coming down to have Sunday afternoon barbecue with us. She lives in Chicago, and she was driving in, and she gets there, and right as we're sitting out on the porch preparing to have lunch, or dinner actually, it's about 6:30, you start hearing the mob forming down the street. The voices and the screaming and the shouts and the megaphones and the stamping and the hammering on the street with sticks, and chanting all the same old stuff, whose streets are streets, no justice, no peace, no racist police. And my favorite, because it was being chanted into her megaphone by Cori Bush, was, you can't stop the revolution. You can't stop the revolution. Well, we live in a private neighborhood. St. Louis has got these things called private places, which were created in the 1880s, where when St. Louis was a big industrial city, people that wanted to get away from the dirt and pollution would go out in the countryside, buy some farmland, put a wall around it, build houses, the streets, utilities, everything. So all of this is absolutely private property. We've got a gate that separates us from the public street outside. That's a 6-lane wide major thoroughfare called Kings Highway Boulevard. All of a sudden, we see all of Kings Highway Boulevard filled from wall to wall, 100 feet wide, as far south as we can see, with this screaming, angry mob. And the only thing that separates us from them is this 138-year-old wrought iron fence. And I look over at Patty, my wife, and I said, God, I hope they don't come this direction. Right then, the gate gets folded down to the ground. They come pouring in. And, my wife and daughter went in the house to call 911 to no avail. I stood out on the corner of the porch, and I said what I always call the two most racist, white supremacist words in the English language. I said, private property. Now, being communists, that pissed them off, and they started pouring in more and more and more. And when my wife and daughter are in the house calling 911, I reached around the corner where I had it stashed and grabbed my AR-15. And now I'm standing out there on my porch. And I've got about 15 feet of grass between me and a hedge, and then a low wall, and about another 20 feet of grass between me and where the mob's now lined up, 3 or 4 or 500 of them. I think I'm doing okay. And I think Patty's still in the house calling the cops. Well, all of a sudden, I see her show up in front of me, waving that dumb little Bryco pistol over her head. Now, she'd never had a gun in her hand before in her life. Even if that gun had worked, she wouldn't know how to make it fire. But now I've got a problem because she's between me and the mob. And if something goes down, she's in my line of fire. And I didn't want to have to accidentally, put a bullet in her. So now I've got to come out on the front lawn too. And that's when you start seeing all these photographs like the one you've got up right now.
Yeah, this is actually a real famous photograph, and we kind of added it part of the flyer because people really recognize this photo, and now that we understand, now you're in front of your house, you got your AR, your wife's pointing the pistol, and like you said, she's never done this before. Okay, what's the after fact? You get arrested, you go through the court system. Like what kind of went through all that, and then didn't the governor kind of
I got to
walk us through that?
I got to back up before that because that's the story everybody heard of. But then what people don't know is the mob came back the next Friday specifically to kill us and burn down the house. And it did not fit the narrative because it's hard to call people that are there specifically to kill you and burn down the house, peaceful social justice warriors walking calmly through the neighborhood. We got a tip Tuesday morning from a client of ours who is a young African-American woman. We'd represented her mom, her sister. We'd been to her college graduation. We'd been to her sister's college graduation. When her husband, when he got out of the Army, he joined the St. Louis Police Department, got depressed and shot himself. We went to his funeral. Well, she calls up Tuesday morning and tells us that what we did was inexcusable and we were going to have to die. And they're coming back on Friday to kill us and burn down the house. And so we start trying to get some secondary employment cops to do security for us. None of the cops that we normally hired in our business would do it for fear of the bad press. I got referred to this place in rural Missouri that does high-tech security all over the world, a bunch of special forces guys. They wouldn't do it because they'd gotten bad press over the Ferguson riots. So I say to the owner, I said, well, what the heck am I supposed to do? And he said, if I were you, I'd just take what I can't live without, put it in the vehicles, and abandon the house. I said, no effing way in heck we're going to do that. We'll go down to the ship if we have to, but we're not going to abandon the house. Well, earlier in the week, I'd gotten a call from the White House, and the gentleman said, the president wants to express his support. If there's ever anything we can do for you, let us know. Well, now it's Thursday night. The mob's coming back tomorrow to kill us. And our then 31-year-old daughter, who had stayed over because of what happened, went down the basement, got her favorite stuffed animal from when she was a little girl, came up, gave us each a hug and a kiss, and left, never expecting to see us alive again. So I called up that number at the White House, and I said, well, now is a pretty stinking good time, okay? And so he gave me Mark Meadows' cell phone number. And I got a hold of Mark Meadows and told him the story. Next call I made was to Tucker Carlson. And I'm sitting on the bench in the kitchen, and Tucker Carlson puts us live on TV and says, I'm talking to Mark McCloskey. I can hear Mrs. McCloskey sobbing in the background. The mob's coming back tomorrow to kill them. The city police have been ordered to stand down. The state's not going to provide them any protection. If we don't do something, they're going to get killed. Next night, that was a long, long night. We still don't know what's going to happen. But then it's Friday afternoon, and the miracle starts to happen. There's a fourth-generation cattle farmer from Kansas, ex-Navy SEAL. When he heard the call to arms, threw his gear in the back of his truck, drove straight through, and got there at about 6:30. By the time the mob hit the gate that night, this was July the 3rd, 2020, we had 6 ex-Navy SEALs. We had 10 secondary employment cops. We had the FBI light aircraft circling the top of the house. There were FBI snipers on the roof. We had what we used to call in the Reagan administration, peace through superior firepower. And once again, we held them off. We didn't get the all clear till about 4:30 in the morning. When we finally got the all clear, we got a couple hours of sleep. And then we went down to my mom's stuff. My mom had been dead about 30 years at that point, but she had a flag. She was a big Republican organizer. She had a flag that had been given to her by a congressman she got elected, which had hung over the Capitol building. We dug that out of her stuff, unfolded over the front door of the house, had a picture of us taken there, and made a vow that we were going to do everything we could for the rest of our lives to defend this republic and pull back our freedoms. And that's what we've been doing ever since. But, you know, getting back to your point, when the mob that first night started to dissipate, and all I saw was an army of cell phones pointed at me, I knew this was too big of a deal for the left to go let it go. In the world today, there's only one unforgivable crime, and that's standing up against the left. And I knew that they were going to have to take some action. Governor Parson, our governor, got on national television about 3 days after the first event and said that he would pardon us no matter what. President Trump was on the patio of the White House talking to Judge Janine on her program and came out in support of us. Our Attorney General wrote a letter in support. 14 sitting congressmen wrote a letter to then Attorney General Bill Barr telling him he needed to prosecute our prosecutor for violating our civil rights because she charged us each with 2 Class E felonies, which would cost us 4 years in the slammer and our law licenses and everything else. But because she's just as dumb as a sack of hammers, she's just a Soros-appointed, Soros-funded prosecutor. She used us in her campaign propaganda, just like Letitia James and Alvin Bragg and Fannie Willis. The good news is we've got honest judges in the city of St. Louis. And so when we filed the motion to have her and the circuit attorney's office barred from the case due to their bias and prejudice, that was granted. And she took that up to the Court of Appeals and lost, tried to have the Supreme Court take it. They wouldn't take it. And so we eventually, under the law in Missouri, the governor can't pardon you until you've actually been convicted of something. He can't proactively pardon you. So eventually we pled guilty to a couple of minor misdemeanors. I pled guilty to something which was a $750 fine. And we thought that would be the end of it, right? Our lawyers told us it would be the end of it. The lawyer, the prosecutor for the state said that would be the end of it. But then the Bar Association decided that what we did in defending ourselves against a mob on our front porch, a mob that was threatening to kill us and rape my wife and burn down my house and burn down my office building and even murder my dog, that defending ourselves against that mob was a crime of moral turpitude. and that we lacked the moral fortitude to be attorneys and asked the Supreme Court of Missouri to indefinitely suspend our law licenses. And you know, we had, and by the way, the criminal defense wasn't cheap. The defense of our law licenses wasn't cheap. Eventually, what the Supreme Court did was suspend our law licenses for 6 months, probated for a year, so we could continue practicing law, but we were on probation. And as long as we stayed good little boys and girls, we'd be allowed to keep practicing law. But my favorite part was they also imposed an obligation for us to do 100 hours of free legal services for a 501c3 public service organization. So I called up my buddies at Project Veritas, and I said, hey, you guys are a 501c3 public service entity, aren't you? Then I'd love to work for you guys for free. Bar Association says, can't do that. Supreme Court says, can't do that. Can't work for a conservative organization. And we tried to go from entity to entity, and they said either the Bar Association said we couldn't do it, or they said we couldn't do it. Eventually, we went to work. We said, okay, we're going to work for a liberal entity. We went to work for Legal Services of Eastern Missouri, but they didn't want to let us actually see their clients because we might pollute them with our conservative propaganda. And so they allowed us to do homework for them, write briefs and do legal research. And eventually we got that done. But I keep going on, telling me to shut up when I need to. But on July the 10th of 2020, a week and a half after our first event, they came out with a search warrant and they seized those 2 guns. And so as soon as the governor pardoned me, I filed an action under Plevin to get my guns back because the governor's pardon removed every disability and disadvantage attendant to the criminal proceeding against us. And I figured that included taking my property from me. I ought to have a right to get my property back. So I filed that suit. Took about 1.5 years, and the trial judge ruled against me. Court of Appeals ruled against me with the logic that the governor's pardon obliterated the conviction, but not the guilt. And somehow that made sense to the Court of Appeals, even though there's no law to back that up. So I said, okay, we got one better than that. We have a new statute in Missouri that allows expungement. The expungement statute makes it as if the underlying event never occurred. So we got ourselves expunged earlier this year. And as soon as the judge ruled on the expungement, I filed a new motion to have my guns returned because now, as a matter of law, since I've been expunged, I've never been charged with anything. I've never been arrested. I've never pled guilty. I've never been convicted. And if I've never been arrested, charged, or convicted, why the heck does the government still have my guns? Well, so what does the city of St. Louis do? They filed a 23-page brief to try to get my expungement reversed. And we had the hearing on that yesterday, the 14th. And you got to, just to let you know how much the government works against anybody who's on the right. We're in court on the expungement docket earlier this spring. And there are people ahead of us with 50-some felony arrests, misdemeanors, felony charges. And they stand up in front of the judge. The city councilor tells them how to get themselves expunged. And the judge rubber stamps their expungement. It goes on, expungement after expungement, until our case comes up. Then it's a 4-hour hearing where the state calls witnesses and all this kind of stuff. The judge takes 77 days to issue a ruling granting our expungement. And in the hearing yesterday, instead of ruling up from the bench on the motion to reverse himself, he took it under advisement. Well, he's a good judge. He's an honest judge. I guarantee you he's going to not reverse himself, but he just wants to write the order in such a way that the Court of Appeals will have a hard time reversing it. So it's still going on. It's 4 years and a month ago, and we're still having this battle.
Unbelievable.
What an unheard American story. We're going to kick off with pillar leaders in Red America First tonight. We have a corruption pillar leader, and we also have political leaders, both Randy and Mike and Legaso and Hawaii. So we got a lot of people that want to chime in, and we have some people in Texas and Nevada just had birthdays. Make sure you guys unmute as well. So Mike, Legaso will go first and you go next. Legaso, Hawaii, our corruption pillar leader. He's very excited to hear this story tonight, and he's going to kick off the first question in the member Q&A. Go ahead, Legaso. Thank you. Mike's on deck.
What an incredible story, and thank you for standing up for the truth and being the pillar leader that you are. With the election coming up and the craziness that's preceding that and the riots that might ensue, do you have any concerns for you and your family that you're still on a Antifa or Black Lives Matter list that they might return to your home?
Well, absolutely. And we now have half-inch bulletproof Lexan in front of the windows in the house. But you know, the government, not the government, the real government, the powers that be, have this ability to turn on and off the riots like a light switch, right? They turned them on after May the 25th of 2020. They turned them off last year, right? You see this whole last year, no Antifa rioting. We'll see what happens up in Chicago next week. But my suspicion is that the violence will be turned back on here very shortly. And think of it this way: how many pro-Palestinians have you ever met in your life until October 7th of last year? And now all of a sudden, hundreds of thousands of them are calling out on the street. These people really don't know what cause they're fighting for or against. They just know that they've been turned out, and it gives them a sense of unity, a sense of purpose, and it gives them a way to act out. And they're just, you know, the people in front of my house on that first time, on that June 28th, they may have been Black Lives Matter, they may have been Antifa, but what I noticed was an awful lot of what I call just stupid white kids, right? College age girls, people that, you know, with lots of piercings and lots of tattoos that just wanted to be a part of something. And it turns violent real fast. I mean, I will digress. When they left my house that first night, they went down through, by the way, my neighborhood is a private block neighborhood. The mayor doesn't live in my neighborhood. The mayor does not live in a private place. The mayor lives on a public street, half a mile west and 2 blocks north of our neighborhood. But they had to break in to get in. They had to break out to get out. When they got to the mayor's house that night, they shot fireworks through a window. They tried to set her house on fire. There was an NBC affiliate reporter there with an armed guard because they know how peaceful these riots are. And she got confronted by one of these mobsters with an AK-47 and almost had a firefight right in front of the mayor's house until the NBC correspondent backed up. So yeah, we're a little concerned about that. My office building, like I mentioned, is 3 blocks further into the city than my house. I put a thin blue line flag out a second floor window of my office building and got a 9mm through it almost immediately. I mean, and let me just say this: St. Louis is a remarkably dangerous city. We're always a murder capital of the country, sometimes a murder capital of the world. Rudy Giuliani and Bernie Kerik came down and spent a couple of days with us after this happened. And I was comparing with Bernie, St. Louis to New York City. You know, he used to be the police commissioner there, and 8,400,000 residents in New York City. And at that point that year, they had about 300 murders. Only 300,000 people in the city of St. Louis, and we'd had over 260. About 20 times the murder rate of New York City. And that's the background level of violence before you add in the George Floyd effect. So yeah, it's a little concerning.
Oh, perfect. Now we're going to add a clock, Mark, just so you know. It's going to be right above my head, and it's going to tick down just to make sure that we get a lot of questions in there. Those that are watching the live stream, RedAmericaFirst.com. You could be in the platform, America's #1 most engaging platform. We have some questions coming in. We have Mike Floridas on deck. Randy Perham's after him. We got some people got their hands up. So let's start with Mike Florida. Go ahead with your question, and the timer starts. Go.
Mark, since your incident, and I applaud you for defending your wife and your house and your property, have you noticed if more Republicans, conservatives been able to get elected? Has it changed the demographics of how corrupt St. Louis is at all?
Well, the leader of that Antifa organization, Cori Bush, just lost her primary election last Tuesday. So that's some indication. Of course, the biggest impetus there was that she's an anti-Semite, and the fellow running against her had $10 million worth of support from the Jewish community in St. Louis. And so, but she got her comeuppance, can we say. But yeah, I think it has had effect. I think the biggest effect was first-time gun owners in 2020. I think 45% of all first-time gun owners were women. And I think that was a direct result of my wife out there showing what a woman with absolutely no gun experience can do, and what the Second Amendment means for all of us, that the 2 people with 2 guns up against a crowd of hundreds, some of whom were armed and wearing armor, it makes a difference.
Perfect. You got within your time limit. I like that. Good question there, Mike. Now, another pillar leader in Red America First, Randy Perham out of Texas. Go ahead, 30 seconds. Thank
Hey, Mr. McCloskey, thank you for joining us tonight. Truly appreciate that. You set the example for the country actually, and what it means to stand up to the tyranny and the system that we face every day. My question to you, sir, is if you were to move out of Missouri, and I used to live in Missouri, I used to live in St. Robert, Fort Leonard Wood, so I know how crazy that place is. But if you were to move out of Missouri, will these charges still follow you, or would it kind of like just disappear as nothing happened?
As I sit here today, I've never been charged with anything because I've been expunged. Assuming we keep that status,
Yeah.
then we're cool. I thought you were going to ask me where I'd move to, and I'd say Texas in a heartbeat. So I went to undergraduate and law school in Dallas, and so I really like Texas. But I'm born and bred here in Missouri.
Wow, perfect. Since you're so happy about Texas, let's call on Doug, Texas. Go with your question.
Yeah, I'm curious is from kind of a legal standpoint, since you've got that angle as well, is, what about holding people like, Cori Bush and Kamala Harris culpable for, the kind of violence that went on there, and either charging them criminally or, at least in a civil trial, to make them pay some of your damages and some of the damages of the city?
Well, I actually have a lawsuit pending against Cori Bush and her cohort, a guy named Rasheen Aldridge, who are the two heads of this Antifa organization. But on a bigger scale, people like Maxine Waters, people like Kamala Harris, where she says the riots should continue, and she's raising money to bail these people out of jail to come out and riot again. Yeah, I think those people ought to go to jail. I think we used to have this thing that there was a law against, promoting riots, promoting violence, conspiracy to engage in rioting. Where Republicans get arrested for that all the time. I have a lot of January 6ers on my program who are doing serious time in prison for doing no more than being escorted through the Capitol building. And we've got Chuck Schumer on the Supreme Court steps threatening Kavanaugh and Gorsuch that if they don't get it right, they'll pay the price. We got Maxine Waters and we've got Kamala Harris supporting violent revolution and getting away with it and not being prosecuted. Yeah, this world's upside down. I said it at the Republican National Convention 4 years ago. These people view their jobs as protecting criminals against honest citizens instead of protecting citizens against criminals. And I think that that should have some criminal responsibility.
Very good engagement there. Rob, Ohio is next, and we'll start that countdown. Go ahead.
Yes, Mark, if memory serves me right, your wife's pistol was used in court as a demonstration and was inoperable. Is that correct?
That's right. It's a pistol that we had used in a products liability case against the manufacturer of those kinds of pistols. The city had the evidence department disassemble the pistol, reassemble it, make it work, so they could charge her with flourishing a deadly weapon. So she never had a gun. In her case, it wouldn't have made any difference anyway, because she couldn't have gotten the safety off on that gun if it was in 100% tip-top shape, and she never had a pistol in her hand before that day. I mean, talk about guts.
Did anybody go to jail for tampering with evidence?
They wanted to. One of the charges against us was tampering. So, what do you get charged with when the cops beat you, right? You get charged with resisting arrest. So that's that's part of the program, right? Is the best defense is a strong offense.
Perfect. Good interaction there. We got a South Carolina member, Jennifer. Go ahead with your question. Thank you so much.
Well, not really a question. I just wanted to say I do remember that, and I admired you, and I didn't even think it was legal to do that. Aren't you allowed to use guns and to protect yourself on your property? Like, what was their angle?
Well, here's the thing, and people don't really understand this. The stand your ground laws and the castle doctrine, we've got great castle doctrine, great stand your ground laws here in Missouri, but they're affirmative defenses, meaning the government can charge you with a crime. Your defense is self-defense, your defense is a castle doctrine, but both of those issues get submitted to the jury. It's not a get out of jail free card. The jury gets to decide whether or not you were really exercising the castle doctrine, whether you're really acting in self-defense. And just like Donald Trump has found out in New York and in DC, in the city of St. Louis, my jury won't be of my peers. My jury would be from a group of people that would convict me of anything just because of my skin color and my political position. And so that's a real problem with the judicial system these days. And so the government charges us for the crime, but we knew that if we went to trial in this city, that we would not receive a fair trial. And but that's why it was useful or very helpful that the governor promised to pardon us from almost the very first day.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for that. We have Oklahoma State Director Leslie Mahan. Go with your question. Thank you so much.
Hey, Mark, it's good to see you again. Thanks for coming on the show. My question actually is, it kind of has to do with the recent events actually with what happened. 2.9 billion Social Security numbers have been compromised. I was a victim of identity theft when I was first married by a one-armed stripper that worked at a strip club in Wichita Falls, Texas. My concern about that is with the upcoming election, more than likely they could try to use that information for their own benefit to basically, cast ballots as us instead of us going to the polls. That's a concern.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about election fraud this election cycle. I'm mostly concerned about illegals registering to vote in states like Minnesota and Illinois, where you get a driver's license, whether you're a citizen or not. If you get a driver's license, then you can register to vote. In fact, in many of these jurisdictions, getting your driver's license, in fact, registers you to vote. And there's no requirement for citizenship. If we've got 10, 15 million illegal aliens entering the country in the last 3 years, if they can get a significant portion of those folks registered to vote and voting for the folks that give them everything for free, then, the problem, the underlying problem with a democracy is that at some point people learn that they can vote themselves a bank account. And that's a serious problem. And it's a serious problem when the people that want to have a totalitarian government can manipulate the people at the exact opposite end of the spectrum to vote for them on the hope of a freebie, where they can seize absolute control through manipulating the down and out. And that's my biggest concern. Sure, they can cheat in the small scale, they can cheat in the large scale with Social Security numbers, but they can cheat in an enormous scale with illegal aliens if they're effective in doing it.
Thank you so much for that, Mark. Rosemarie, Florida, you're on deck, and Becky is after. Alice in Florida, get ready. Tom, Pennsylvania, get ready. Go ahead, Rosemarie. Thank you.
Mark, thank you for your courage and strength in being able to stand up for all of the things that have happened to you. And I was wondering, do you happen to have a summary of what has happened to you with this whole with this incident? Because I do have a newsletter, the our America First, actually Red America First newsletter, and I would like to see if I can get something from you in order to put it into the newsletter for September.
Well, if you go to my X feed, it's at McCloskey USA. You can if you just post something there, I'll get back to you with a good summary. I'm in the process of writing the book on it. I did an hour's presentation on my Mark McCloskey On Fire program a couple of months ago, which I can send you a copy of. But I've not actually written out. Well, I've got about a 25-page summary that I can send you. But as you can tell from the timer clock here, I'm kind of verbose.
Well, thank you for that, Mark. Appreciate that. We're going to bounce back to Texas if Becky's fast. Go ahead, Becky.
Yes, Mark, I was wondering, while you and your wife were standing your ground, and if I understand it correctly, it was more than one night. Were any shots ever fired?
No shots were fired. there was, on the first night, it was very close. There was a time when a couple of people in body armor were walking up the front steps at us. The one guy pulled out of his ammo pockets 2 loaded magazines, showed them to me so I could see they were loaded, clicked them together, pointed at me and says, "You are next." The guy standing next to him was wearing light colored body armor, and he was packing a sidearm. And I leaned over to my wife and I said, "If those guys come any closer, I'm going to have to kill them." And she leaned over to me and said, "You're not killing anybody tonight." But there were people in that crowd that were live streaming and texting at that moment, saying that they were armed, and if a shot went off, even an accident, that they'd take us down like dogs. But fortunately, no shots got fired, nobody got injured. But that's the beauty of the Second Amendment. 2 of us with 2 guns held off a mob of hundreds.
Wow, what a
Amazing.
good story there. We're gonna call Tom, Pennsylvania, Sandra, Nevada's on deck, and then we're gonna get pillar leader on the Christian side, Teresa, Florida, and Tanya, Ken, Allison, get ready. Tom, go ahead.
Mark, great to hear from you. That picture of you and your wife is a classic. My question is, are you allowed to defend yourself in St. Louis if somebody breaks into your house?
Oh, absolutely. We have a great castle doctor here. Our current governor, when he was in the Missouri Senate, took part drafting it. But you have, in Missouri, you've got a right to use force and deadly force to defend yourself, your family, your property. And so I was down giving a speech in Oklahoma last week. In Oklahoma, unless you're inside your house, you don't have that right. In Missouri, we're not limited to that. If you are on property which you own or lease or have a right to be on, you can defend yourself, your family members, your property with deadly force if necessary. But as I was saying, that's an affirmative defense. The state can still charge you, like Daniel Perry down in Austin, Texas, right? Where he got 10 years in prison for doing nothing more than defending himself, because you have to raise that castle doctrine, raise that right of self-defense as an affirmative defense, and then hope the jury agrees with you. We had attempted to pass a bill last year, which I testified in favor of, which would turn that presumption around, that if you pled self-defense, the government would then have the burden of proving that you did not. So you didn't have to prove yourself innocent. The government had to prove yourself guilty.
Understand. Thank you for that. We're unmuting Sandra, Nevada. She's got her hand up ready to ask you. So if you could unmute Sandra, and then Teresa's next. Thank you.
Hi. The dog thought I said hi to him. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sure can.
Okay, I just wanted to tell you, thank you very much for standing up for the rights of the Constitution. Also, 3 little things, comments. From what I understand, there were people coming onto your yard and they had weapons in their hands and they were yelling at you and threatening you.
Oh, this is all true. And
you can't defend yourself for something. You're lucky you weren't killed. You know that?
Well, I agree. But here's the thing, right?
Sick.
Our Soros-funded prosecutor in the city, she does not prosecute any serious crime. Well, she eventually was thrown out of office because it turns out that she was going to nursing school while she was pretending to be our circuit attorney. But the government can charge you with what the government wants to charge you. And even if there's no basis in it, you still have to defend it. And as is the case in most of these political prosecutions of people on the right, it's the process that's the punishment. It drives you into bankruptcy. Look at, people like Mike Flynn, for example. Lots and lots of people, most of the January 6ers that are driven into abject poverty by having to defend false charges. That's the real punishment, is a persecution.
It's like a 10-year bureaucratic nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much for coming on our show.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you for that, Sandra, Nevada. Now we have our Christian pillar leader, Red America First, Teresa, Florida. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for joining us. And I'm so sorry for what you've been through. And I know they could come after any one of us at any time and just put us all through hell too. So all I got to say is God bless you. I'm so sorry again for what you're going through, and we'll just keep praying for you all. Because I know, I mean, even if it's the two of you, or even if you get a patriotic person to help you, there you just don't. You're dealing with some really evil, demonic.
No, I
So I,
understand. And the way I always phrase it from the very beginning was God came knocking on my door that night, disguised as an angry mob, because it gave us an opportunity to give back in ways that we could not have otherwise. You know, the Lord moves in mysterious ways, and you know, He gave us an opportunity to tell this story, to stand up for the people, and to go to work for the Trump campaign and campaign for Donald Trump, which was really the highlight of our life, and speak at the national convention and campaign for him around the country, which we're you know, going to be doing again this fall.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. New member to Red America First, our first time on the show, Tanya from Florida. Go ahead with your question.
Oh, I couldn't hear you guys for a second. It kind of went away. I wanted to ask Mark, first off, or actually, I don't even have a question. I just wanted to say that I watched everything on TV that happened, and I was absolutely stunned at what you and your family had to endure. And I just want to tell you, God bless you for standing up for the Second Amendment and doing what every American has the right to do, which is protect their property, their land, their home, their family. You know, my firm belief is God, family, country, and you did that. And you know what? God bless you, and thank you so much for sharing your story with us. That I really don't have a question, but I really felt necessary to say that to you.
Well, I really appreciate it. You know, in retrospect, this had been going on for about a month at the time they hit our house, and really nobody else in the country had stood up at that point and just said no. Governments were letting their cities burn. Governors were letting their states burn. Nobody was standing up and just saying no. We made a decision that if it came our direction, we weren't going to take it sitting down. And you know, if everybody stood up together, if we all pulled together as people, we could stop this. We could take this country back in a heartbeat.
So unity before division. That's what we're going to be pushing going forward. Is we need to be united, and you know, this is a good theme tonight. We have to unite. So Janice, Florida, thank you so much for coming tonight. What's your question for Mark, this American hero? Thank you.
I don't really have a question. I'd like to tell him also thank you for coming on. And we never thought that what was going on was fair. And then kind of lost track of the news and things. So I'm glad you came on. Bless you.
Appreciate it. God bless you as well.
That was nice. Janice from Florida there. So Mark, my wife actually has a question. Go ahead.
Well, I was just kind of, I think someone already asked my question. It was just pertaining to, you know, what rights do we have, you know, like in other states, you know, like you're in Missouri. So would we have the same rights as you? I mean, could we defend ourselves with our guns if someone comes to knocking on our door? You know,
well, you know,
that's just something we need to look into.
Yeah. I would tell you that the Constitution of the United States, the Second Amendment, should be interpreted to give all of us an absolute right to defend ourselves, to use weapons to defend ourselves as necessary. It goes back before that, because our rights are our right of self-defense, our right to protect our families and our property, our rights that are given to us by God. They're incorporated and reduced to writing by the framers of the Constitution, by the drafters of the Declaration of Independence, but they are given to us as human beings made in the image of the Lord. And what the Lord gives us, no government can take away. Although they will try, and they will put you in jail for trying to assert your rights. But those rights are God-given, not government granted, and they are rights, not privileges. States vary from state to state. When I drive to visit my daughter in Chicago, I've got to take my pistol off my waistband. I've got to lock the pistol, unload it in one part of the car, and put the magazine and the ammunition locked in another part of the car. Because if I don't, I go to prison in Illinois. And so it's just, and we're down in Oklahoma, like I was saying, speaking to an organization last week, and there was a 16-year state prosecutor there who is describing Oklahoma law. You'd think Oklahoma would be a pretty conservative place, but there you can only use lethal force to defend yourself if you are inside your house or inside your car. And as in our case, if they could breach the house and hundreds of them storm in, you're gone. I mean, by the time they get inside, it's too late. And so laws like that, I think, are good, but probably useless in a mob situation.
Wow, this is really flowing well. Thank you, Mark, for that. We have a question from the state of Hawaii. Megeso, go ahead, live from Hawaii. Thank you.
Hey, Mark, do you have constitutional sheriffs in Missouri, and where were they during this whole process?
Well, you know, unfortunately for us, in the city of St. Louis, we've got an elected sheriff who is not a policeman. He just lost his primary last week, so the people of St. Louis agree with me on this. He was a bill collector for our electric utility. He just was a political guy, okay? And all the sheriffs do in St. Louis is prisoner transport and courthouse security. It's a joke. We have real strong sheriffs in other jurisdictions. Our current governor, for example, Mike Parson, before he went into politics, he was a sheriff in his hometown after he got out of the Army. And so in every county, as you know, the sheriff is the highest ranking elected official. They have a constitutional duty. Sheriffs, unlike chiefs of police, take an oath to defend the Constitution of the state and the federal government. And they've got a duty under that oath to defend you against the federal government if the federal government violates your constitutional rights. How many sheriffs will really do that? I hope most of them. How many of them have so far? You know, I've had a lot of those sheriffs on my program, but in the United States, you can probably count those sheriffs on two hands.
Wow, Mark, what an amazing response there. Rosemarie, Florida, and Doug, Texas on deck. Go ahead. Thank you.
What do you foresee as far as Antifa and some of these groups in the future? Do you think they will resurface during this election period, or what?
I think there's a high probability of it. I think that the left will use the riots as an example of and describe it as a chaos that results from the potential Trump administration, and that we have to protect us against the chaos that follows Donald Trump. But they can turn it on and off like a light switch. But I know that they have not been employing Antifa in the last year because it would reflect badly on the Biden administration. My bottom line is that these organizations don't spontaneously erupt. These are not groundswells of public outcry. These are organizations that are funded by the left and turned on and off by the powers that be. But if Trump gets elected, like any caged animal, I think you'll see them striking out in fear and terror because their paychecks are going to end and their gravy train is going to come to a halt, and they will have to do something to try to become relevant again. And that I think will result in violence.
Go ahead, Doug, Texas.
Yeah, well, my question is again, pointing towards those groups, that you've had to face is that, do you think that there are other groups out of there laying in wait? Because obviously BLM has been significantly dampened, due to everything coming out about them. And, I'm sure some of that's going to happen with Antifa. Are there any other groups out there that you feel is going to come out of the groundswell or something like this to attack us? And are there any of those out on the right side too? When I say right, I don't mean correct.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Here's my concern. I've been saying this for many years, not just since our notoriety, but I've been a champion of anti-communism for my entire adult life. I started giving public presentations against communist expansionism in 1977 with Robert Mugabe's takeover of Rhodesia. But their whole game plan right now is to have a Kent State type situation where they can precipitate some kind of a violent event, where they can film bodies on the ground, blame it on right-wing extremism, then try to seize guns and put some people in concentration camps. That will be, problem, reaction, solution, a spiral where there become more and more conflict, more and more arrests, more and more violent resistance, until there's an opportunity for the government to declare martial law and start rounding everybody up. I believe that's the game plan. I believe that they will try to inflame every dissident group into engaging as much violence as possible to precipitate such a thing. And that's what we have to resist. I mean, they want to goad us into that kind of a situation because they know that people on our side won't give up our guns without a fight. And it's that fight that they're looking for in order to identify the danger, just like the Merrick Garland says that the greatest threat to American democracy is right-wing extremism, which means God-fearing, constitutional supporting Americans, because what they want is to create this single world socialist government, and they cannot do that as long as we are armed and as long as we're aware of it.
Amen to that. Mark, just curious, where's Patricia today?
She's sitting right here, but she is I got to tell you, after 4 years, and I got off another program about 5 minutes before I jumped on this one, and we've got another 2 programs tomorrow. It's an emotional burden on her still. It takes a lot of we can't go anywhere now without being recognized. We can't go anywhere without the fear that the people in the restaurant are going to spit in our food. Or I've gotten contacted by people who said that they had the staff at restaurants bragging out loud about how they're messing with our orders. I mean, this is our new life, and we'll never get the old life back. And it's been quite a strain on both of us.
Well, have you had Pappy's before?
Pappy's? What is that?
The barbecue.
Oh no. I make my own barbecue sauce, by the way. I don't know if you know that. I can ship you guys a bottle of the McCloskey barbecue sauce. I made a lot of it for our first annual Pink Shirt Guy barbecue and rhino roast, and I've got a lot left over. So we'll send you a case of barbecue sauce.
Outstanding. We would love that, and we would love you to come back on, and we would love to meet Patricia, because sometimes Valerie and I travel a lot, and St. Louis, we were fortunate we got to go on the little elevator that goes in the arch, so we were able to do that, and it was a very interesting city. We really we enjoyed it, but we didn't really experience the drama at nighttime. So
there's our barbecue sauce.
Oh, wow, look at the logo. I love it.
Yeah,
right. Famous pick with you and Patricia. Well, we really appreciate it, Mark, and we love the unheard story, and we're gonna help share it. This is Red America First, and one of our missions when we first started was providing a platform for the unheard Americans. We were being censored everywhere. Pastors couldn't preach at churches. It was a complete disaster. And we started this organization, and that was one of our primary missions. Providing a platform for unheard Americans, because there's issues going on all over the place. I got told, hey, did you know Vermont flooded? I didn't know Vermont flooded. That's just one example, because mainstream media, as you know, likes to control the message, control the agendas. And this platform is to be unscripted. We bring guests every week like yourself from an unheard American perspective, or somebody educating us on what's really going on, because we're sick of the lies. Now the next phase, as you know, George Floyd was the whole burning America and all the blue cities. Now we're seeing the Palestinian pro-Palestinian supporters, and some of them they just changed their hat. They took off BLM, or they took off Antifa, and now they're putting on pro-Palestine hat, and they're doing the same stuff. They're burning.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience. When I was running for U.S. Senate, we had overpass rallies, and the last overpass rally before the primary, there was an Antifa group that hit our group, put one of my guys in the hospital. But the girl who was leading this stuff just recently, I was coming back to my house, and the entry to our private place was blocked with a pro-Palestinian protest. I look over at Patty and say, see that girl out there leading this? That was the same girl that was leading the Antifa organization that put my guy in the hospital 2 years ago. And so it's just different hats, exact same radicals, and I guarantee you they're paid by the exact same people.
Wow. Well, thank Thank you again, Mark, for coming tonight on Red America First. We'd love to have you come back. Can we have you come back with Patricia next time?
Absolutely, yeah, we'd love to. And if you've got 2 seconds, I'm just going to say this. Ever since they passed FEMA, I believe that at some point in our life, FEMA would declare some kind of faux emergency and declare martial law and lock us all down, not let us go to work and not let us go to school, and not let us go to church. But I figured they'd have to put a gun to our head to make us comply. And then in March of 2020, they just asked. They declared COVID emergency and just asked. And everybody just laid down, even if it meant the loss of their careers, loss of their income, loss of their fortune, loss of their family businesses, inability to see their own parents or grandparents die in a nursing home. And everybody just did it. What more proof of how absolutely cowed the American people have become than that? The government learned that they could do anything now without any significant protest. And think about a month and a week ago. They put the machinery in place to depose Joe Biden. They attempt to assassinate Donald Trump, or at least create a situation where the vast majority of people believe that the government was involved in the assassination of Donald Trump. And they don't have to hide it anymore. They do it under circumstances where they know that they're doing it, because they know that they now have such absolute power, and they have so cowed us that they can set up in motion a plot to depose the sitting president and assassinate the old president, do it in the open. And here it is a month and a week later, and it's not even headline news. Nobody's even talking about it. Buildings aren't burning in the streets. There's not hundreds of thousands of Americans protesting, saying, how can you depose a sitting president, put in as a Democrat nominee a person that nobody has voted for, and try to assassinate the ex-president and most likely the next president? How come there's not hundreds of thousands of millions of people protesting the street and saying, we cannot tolerate this? Because we have become cowards. And our job, each and every one of us, is to wake people up and say, we cannot tolerate this. This is a government by the consent of the governed. And whenever anything bad like this happens, it's because we sit back and we let it happen.
Well, it's just like the J6ers, like Ashley and I were gonna go to Washington, D.C. for that. And if we would have, we probably would have been one of those people that walked through the building because we just are excited about our country, So I think that puts fear in people. That's what they want to do, is they want to keep us silenced and not, using our rights. So
everybody's got a soft, comfortable life, and they don't want to risk it. Well, a young man stood up in Philadelphia a couple of hundred years ago and said, I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. And that's the situation we're in right now. People have to be willing to do to save our republic that which they did voluntarily under the BS of COVID, and that is be willing to risk their livelihoods, be willing to risk their businesses, be willing to risk their employment and their lives if necessary to go forth and save this republic and pull back our freedoms. And it is a life or death situation now for our country, for our freedoms, and for our very lives.
Yeah. And that's why we do Red America First. So.
Well, thank you, Mark, for joining us tonight, and we'll definitely have you come back. I'll coordinate with you, and we'd love to meet Patricia. And ever, if you're in Florida, Central Florida, if you're in Tampa, or if you're in the Space Coast watching the rocket, or if you're in Orlando, please ping us. We want to shake your hand and take a selfie.
I sure appreciate it. And if you're ever in this neck of the woods, we'll buy you lunch and buy you a drink.
Outstanding. That's Mark McCloskey, Unheard American Story here on Red America First. Him and his wife went through the meal, and they still seem like they're going through all that. What a story. We're going to be going state to state now.